Well, hey, thanks for being here again today. I'm Caleb. I'm the Connections Pastor. So excited you're taking some time to hang out with us for our online experience. Today, we're wrapping up a series that we started several weeks back called For Haywood. And For Haywood is more really than just a series that we do here at our church. It's really something that we try to talk about all the time, about the fact that we want to be a church that is known for being what we are for and not just what we are against. And so that's what this kind of series is about. And it's kind of a mindset we try to have within our church that we want to be for our community. And so in the last few weeks, Pastor Heath, our lead pastor, has talked to us a few ways about how we do that. He's talked about the fact that we can give specifically to certain things in our community, the way that we can serve in our church and in our community. And today, we're going to wrap this series up by talking about the last thing that we want to do in order to be for Haywood, and that is that we want to love our community. And so I've got some stuff that I'd love to share with you today. A lot of these ideas are not original to me. I just want to say that up front. A great guy by the name of Andy Stanley, a lead pastor at North Point Community Church. He shares a lot of these great ideas, and I've kind of taken them and kind of made them my own. But I want to share them with you today because I think they're so impactful in thinking about how we can love our community. So I want to tell you a story. Right after my son was born, he's 7 now, but right after he was born, we knew going into his birth that he was going to have some medical issues, and he's great now, and things have turned out wonderful. But when he was born, I can remember not long after he was born, matter of fact, the next after he was born, we had a doctor, they did some scans on him, and the doctor came and told us, he said, "Hey guys, I'm just going to be honest with you. We've never seen anything like this before." What Reed was dealing with. He had like a cyst on his brain. Again, he's fine now. But when they told us that, Sally and I were shocked. And we were in this state of just an emergency, right? Like this was scary. This was awful. And so they get us connected with a doctor down in Charlotte. And a couple of days after we get home from the hospital, we go down to meet with this doctor in Charlotte. And I'm walking in with my baby. And, you know, we're in this kind of state of an emergency. We have no idea what's going on and what's going wrong. And so I'm walking in with my little newborn son, Reed. We're first-time parents. We're trying to still figure everything out. He's got some of this medical stuff going on. And I can remember walking in that doctor's office and the doctor talking to us for a little bit. And then, you know, he was like, "Well, hey, can I hold your son? I want to do an exam on him." And, you know, before I gave him my son, I did like each one of you guys probably do in any kind of emergency, right? Like, before I cared about whether or not he could actually take care of my son, I asked him a really important question that most of you probably always ask too whenever you're in a situation like that. But I looked at him square in his face and said, "Hey, before I can give you my son, I got to know, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Like, I got to know. Like that's what you would do, right?" I mean, no, absolutely. Of course not. We would never do something like that. Because in a state of an emergency and when things are chaotic and crazy, we care more about people's competency than we care about their politics, or than we care about their beliefs, or that we care maybe about their culture and the way that they were raised, right? We care about what matters in those moments. And so as we're wrapping up this series of For Haywood, I'm just gonna be honest, it appears to me, just like I was in a state of emergency then, that in some ways it does feel like our world, our country, even our own small community here in Canton, North Carolina, it seems like we're in a bit of an emergency. I mean, think about it. There's a lot of craziness happen overseas right now in the Middle East, and in our own country, we're coming into a political season, an election season, and it feels like our country is so divided, and everybody just disagrees about everything. And then right here in our community, you know, we've had a major industry that's left, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future is going to hold. There's a lot of uncertainty about what our town is going to look like in the next 5 years. You know, there's worries that people have, and I can empathize with some of these worries of, like, you know, the different types of people that may move into our community, how it may look differently 5 to 10 years from now than what it looks like right now that we're all pretty comfortable with. And in situations like this, it never fails. People come to me sometimes, they're like, "Man," especially when it comes to like politics and the way that people just seem to hate each other so much. People come to me and they say, "Man, it's just, I've never seen it this bad before. I don't feel like our country's ever been this bad before. We are so just lost and everybody's so mad at each other. I've never been this bad before." And part of me wants to be like, "You realize we had a civil war almost a couple hundred years ago, right?" And so I don't know if it's never been this bad or not, or if it's been worse. But a lot of times in situations like this, Christians especially, we'll kind of spiritualize this. We'll say things like, you know, God's obviously up to something. He must be doing something right now. Things are so crazy. He must be up to something. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe with everything that's happening, in the Middle East right now, maybe God is up to something. Maybe in our own country, as people seem so divided and so ideologically diverse and so separated and so mad at each other all the time, that God is up to something. And maybe right here in our own community in Canton, North Carolina, as things are changing and it's uncomfortable, God may still be up to something. And while I don't know maybe what God's up to, here's what I do know. That even in the midst of all this chaos and even in the midst of what feels like an emergency, we still have a responsibility. Jesus followers, people who claim to follow Jesus, we have a responsibility. We have something to do. Not now, if you're just someone who says, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but you don't really follow him, again, I don't really think that's Christianity, but if you are someone who claims to actually follow Jesus and wants to live the life that he has put before us to live, we have a responsibility. Our responsibility is not, I think, to solve all the world's problems. Our responsibility is not to solve the world's problem. It's not to solve our country's problem. It's not to even solve our local community's problems. We can engage and help, but let's be honest, we can't solve problems. Most of us, we can't even solve our own problems. So funny, right? Like I'll hear somebody, I think this is funny, maybe you don't, but I hear people all the time that say things like, man, if I were president, or man, if I were the governor, or man, if I were the mayor, how they would, fix and solve all the problems. And sometimes I want to look at those people and be like, hey, dude, I see your 10-year-old in our kids ministry. You can't even control them. How do you think you can control all these other problems in the world? But that's neither here nor there. But let's be honest. We feel like we got to solve all these problems, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Our thing that we have a responsibility to do is something that Jesus told his followers when he was walking on this earth. Because they too were in the midst of a pretty chaotic time. Jesus, on the night before he was crucified, he's hanging out with his disciples. They're having a meal together. It's commonly known as the Last Supper. And in that meal and in that time together, he gives them a lot of instruction. And we see this kind of played out, and this is recorded for us in the book of John, and John chapters 13, 14, and 15 on before Jesus was crucified. And he gives his followers some instructions. He's telling them in the midst of kind of his last talk with them, he's explaining to them that, hey, after what's about to happen, you're going to come into some really difficult situations. It's going to feel like an emergency. It's going to feel like all these problems that are weighing so heavy on you. You're going to feel like you have enemies. You're going to have people who hate you. But then he tells them something in John chapter 15, verse 12. He says, in the midst of all of this, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. My command is this: you love each other as I have loved you. Jesus tells them in the midst of all the chaos that you're about to experience, in the midst of what feels like this emergent situation, that your responsibility is to love one another. And I think that's the same charge we're given today. For those of us who follow Jesus, in the midst of an emergency, in the midst of all this chaos, in the midst of all this turmoil that we feel like we don't know what to do, our responsibility is to love one another. Our responsibility is to love one another. Now, will loving one another have ramifications into solutions for our community and our country and the world? Of course. But our focus should be loving one another. And that seems simple in principle, right? Like it seems simple. Love other people. Check. I can do that. But it's actually very difficult when we get in the practicality of it all. Because let's be honest, it's hard to love the people that we don't agree with. It's hard to love people that we don't really like. But Jesus understood that. And still, he challenged his followers and he challenges us, even the people that you don't like, your responsibility, especially in the midst of what feels like a chaotic moment, is to love one another. And that's why Jesus actually tells his followers when he's preaching one of his most famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount, he tells his followers in Matthew chapter 5, verses 46 and 47, he tells them, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? And not even the tax collector is doing that. And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? See, Jesus is giving us a choice. He tells us, hey, you have a choice to make. You can be common, ordinary, predictable people. Everybody loves the people that are close to them. Everybody loves the people who think and believe and agree and vote like they do. Everybody loves the people that are similar to them. But when you take the initiative and when you actually choose to love the people that are not like you, that are maybe even your enemy, that's actually what causes your love to shine forth. And that's what actually makes you more like your Father in heaven. When you choose to love those who are unlike you. And so that's what I want to get us to understand. I think our culture teaches all the time that love is just a feeling, right? Like love is just something that I feel towards someone. But if you look throughout scripture, and especially if you listen to Jesus, you come to find out that love is not about a feeling. Love is a choice. You can choose to love other people, even when they seem hard to love, even when you don't agree with them. Because love is a matter of will. It's not a feeling. Real love, loving other people, comes out in actions towards those people. And so it's a choice that we make. It's not a feeling. C.S. Lewis, a great author and theologian, he says it like this, and this is kind of a long quote, so I'd love for you to hang with me as I read this to you. He says, "The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Don't waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. Because as soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love them. If you endure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking them more. If you do them a good turn, though, you will find yourself disliking them less. The difference between a Christian and a worldly man is not that the worldly man has only affections or likings and the Christian man only has charity. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them, but the Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including people he could not have even imagined himself liking at the beginning." See, that's the beauty of choosing to love people. When you choose love and when you decide that, hey, love is not a feeling, it's a choice. It is a matter of will, that I am going to choose to love these people even though I don't necessarily like them, even though they don't agree with me, even though they don't think like me, even though they were brought up culturally way different than me. I'm going to choose to love them. Because choosing to love them, making love an act of will, is actually beautiful thing, because here's what happens when we choose to love. Love becomes the bridge between our differences. Love is the bridge between our differences. When we choose to love someone, we come to find out that maybe they're not as different for me than I thought they were. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, how we can practically do that. But love is the thing that actually bridges our difference. And the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus bridged the gap between us and him with his love. Romans 5:8, Paul's famous passage to the church in Rome, he tells them that while we were still sinners, yet while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Do we get the ramifications of that? Like, even though when God saw all of our mess and all of our stuff and a lot of things about us that God probably wouldn't like, he still chose to love us enough to bridge the gap. And so can you imagine with me for a minute? What if the church set the tone? What if there were people in our church who didn't value the same things we do, who felt differently about certain political topics than you do, who were Christian Democrats, and yes, Christian Republicans listening to this, there are Christian Democrats, and Christian Republicans, and yes, Christian Democrats listening to this, there are Christian Republicans. What if we came together to love the world like God does, like Jesus does? Isn't that the hope of the world? Wouldn't that make a difference? Wouldn't our light shine the brightest when we love the people that the world says we should be the most separated from? Because see, we can disagree on so many things. We can disagree politically. We can disagree theologically. We can disagree religiously. We can disagree about so many things and yet still love unconditionally. Because love is a matter of will. It's not a feeling. And as a matter of fact, the beauty of this is the more politically and culturally diverse that we are, the harder it's going to be to choose love. But when we choose love in those moments, that's actually when our light shines to the world the brightest. Because love is a choice, it's a matter of will, it's not just a feeling. So will we choose love, even with the people that the world says we should be the most separated from? But once we do that, once we choose to love people, how can we then practically live that out? Like, what can we actually do? Because the truth of the matter is, when it seems like the world is in an emergency, a lot of us have a propensity to do nothing but complain about everything. I mean, you see this, right? Maybe this is you, but maybe you have family members, maybe you have friends that do this, right? Like they sit back, they watch the news, they're aware of everything that's going on in the world. And so they sit back, and I know this is even the case for me, it's real easy to sit back and do nothing and complain about everything. Because let's be honest, in the world that we live in today, and the 24-hour news cycle, and the fact that we carry around everything that's happening in the world in our pockets, and we can know about everything, we are aware of all the stuff that's taking place. We're aware of all the evil, all the horrible things that are going on throughout the whole world. And so we have a propensity to just sit back and complain about it all, but not really do anything about it. And we usually make one of two choices. We either shut it all out. So we say, hey, I'm never watching the news again. I'm going to live my head under a rock. I'm not going to pay attention to all the stuff that's going on in the world. Not even right here in my own community. I'm just going to stay focused on me, take care of me, my family, my four, no more. And I'm just going to shut it all out. Or we go to the other end of the spectrum of that, and we just take it all in. And it overwhelms us, the amount of sadness and evil that there is in the world. And we just get stuck because we don't know what to do. You know, one of the things that actually amazes me about Jesus is Jesus, when he was walking around on the earth, he seemed to never really engage with all of society's big issues and problems. Like the people at the time, they were so concerned about the fact that they were under Roman authority, and they wanted somebody to come in and fix that for them. But Jesus never got really involved in political issues. He never really got involved in what seemed like the major issues of his day, because he knew that the biggest issue that the world was facing wasn't any of that. All of those problems with societies and cultures, and all of those problems with kings and kingdoms, those were problems that the world had been facing forever, and the world was going to continue to face forever. He knew that the problem was something much bigger than that. The biggest issue that Jesus knew was people's heart. And so Jesus came to address their deepest issue. He came to address their heart issue. And so if you follow Jesus around in the Gospels, it's really neat. He's always willing to jump in and meet people's needs. He's not so much worried on fixing all the big issues of the world, but he is very focused on meeting people's biggest needs, the immediate needs that they have right in front of him. I mean, that's why when he's surrounded by people and the woman comes up and just wants to touch a hem of his cloak, he stops in the middle of his busy schedule and focuses on her. That's why when he's traveling with his disciples, he takes time to sit with a woman at the well who he should have never been hanging out with. And he focuses on addressing her biggest need, her heart issue. See, he's quick to heal others. He's quick to come alongside those and fix people in their biggest need. And so in light of all that, I want us to pay attention to something that Jesus tells his disciples. On the night before he was crucified, he sets the example for how we can practically choose to love one another, even the people that we disagree with, even when it seems like we can't do anything that'll make a difference at all. Jesus does something really special in John chapter 13. It's the night before he's crucified. Him and his disciples have sat down, they're having a meal together. And the custom of that time, when you would bring people into a room like that, is you would have a servant, or you would have someone who would come in because you'd been traveling out in the city, and there were dirt roads everywhere, and you'd been walking everywhere you went. You would have a servant come in, and that servant would wash all of the guests' feet. Well, the disciples were probably supposed to be responsible for that, but they kind of missed the mark there. They didn't get the servant to come in and wash their feet. And so Jesus stands up. You got to understand this moment. Try to put yourself there. Jesus gets up. He's probably wearing like a rabbinical robe, like a robe that showed like he was kind of their teacher. and he was kind of the one in charge. He takes that off. He wraps a towel around his waist, and he goes and he kneels in front of each one of these men who he spent the last 3 years teaching and who they are claiming, this is my Lord. And he gets down on his knees in front of each one of them and he washes each one of their feet. And he gets to Peter. You know, Peter loves to put his foot in his mouth so much, and I empathize so much with Peter. He gets to Peter, and Peter's like, no, Lord, how dare you? You can't wash my feet. I should be washing your feet. And Jesus says, no, you need to understand what's happening in this moment. I'm going to wash your feet. And so he washed their feet, even though they were going to get dirty again. He met their need in that moment, even though the next day he was going to go out and be crucified and they were all going to desert him. He even washed Judas's feet, who was about to go out that night and betray him. He washed their feet, even though they were going to get dirty again. And washing their feet didn't solve their problem, but in that moment, it met their biggest need. And then he tells them, after he goes around and washes each one of their feet, in John chapter 13, verse 14 and 15, he tells them, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. See, Jesus knew something in that moment. When he was commanding them to wash one another's feet, he ensured them that their differences would not divide them. Because here's the thing, you can't wash one another's feet from a distance. See, in our culture and in our society today, the further away we are from a problem, the simpler the solution appears to be. But when you choose to get close, you've got to address the complexity of somebody else's problem. The closer we get, the more we understand each person's current reality. And when you understand someone's current reality, you are less critical. You become less cynical. You can't sit back on the sidelines when you're washing their feet and say, oh, if I were you, I would have done this. Oh, you've put yourself in that position. You can't see someone who's in a really dark situation and say, oh, it's all your fault, when you understand their current reality and when you come close to them. Because you become less cynical. Ultimately, you become less intelligent. Because it's real easy to sit back on the sideline and play armchair quarterback and watch it all on the news and say, man, if only they would do this, if only they would do that. But when you are willing to wash someone's feet, when you're willing to get close to meet their deepest need, you realize you don't have all the answers and you don't have it all figured out. And so that's why this idea of do nothing and complain about everything and just shut it all out, it's not an option for followers of Jesus. And so Jesus tells these guys, hey, look, you're going to disagree. You won't get along with each other. You're going to have disruptions. You're going to have crazy, chaotic times. But you wash each other's feet. And they did. They went out a few days later after Jesus was resurrected. And even though they faced disagreements, even though they came across difficult issues, I mean, go read the book of Acts if you don't think the early church had some stuff that they had to get figured out. They disagreed about a lot when it comes to practicality. They disagreed about a lot culturally. They disagreed about a lot about who was in and who wasn't. But even in the midst of all that, they served and loved one another. They were in proximity with one another. They were washing each other's feet. And because they were in proximity with one another, because they were close as they did that, their disagreements did not divide them. They stayed close. And it changed their hearts. And ultimately, they would go on to change the world. Jesus, and teaching us to wash one another's feet and showing us that great example of servant leadership, of being willing to address each other's deepest immediate needs. He showed us that we're not going to have to agree with each other to still love one another. And it's just that. Jesus didn't command us to agree with one another. Jesus didn't command us to agree with one another. He commanded us to love. And that's the point. That's how we can be for Haywood. That's how we can be for our community, for the people around us who maybe we don't agree with, who maybe we don't even like, but we can still choose love. We can show we love them by meeting their needs, by symbolically washing feet, whatever that looks like. So this is ultimately what For Haywood is all about. This whole series that we've been going through and this whole idea that you're going to continue to see if you're a part of Pinnacle Church. You're going to see ways that we as a church are going to be for our community. It's about washing people's feet. It's about meeting needs, even the people that we don't agree with. It's about giving to groups and partners that are already doing this well and coming along and supporting them. That's why we've asked throughout this series, we've been doing this big push for you to give a one-time gift of $24.99 to our For Haywood campaign, to our For Haywood offering. And this one offering, it's been amazing because we've got people who have given to our church who are covering all the logistical costs and all the costs that come in to doing something like this, to where we can take every bit of the proceeds from this gift and give it to one of our community partners, so that we can come along and support other partners and other people who are washing feet. So we're going to talk continually in our church about ways you can give, about ways you can serve, about ways you can serve in our church, because it's, in some ways, it starts here. It starts with washing the feet of the people in our community, in our local congregation, but also ways that you can serve in our community, ways that you can serve with different groups and different organizations to come alongside and meet needs. Because when we give, when we serve, and when we love, even the people that the world says we shouldn't, that's when our light shines the brightest. And that's what has the power to change our community. So will you choose love? Understanding that love is a matter of will. And will you follow Jesus' command to not necessarily always agree with one another, but to always love one another? Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, God, thank you for giving us the perfect example of what it means to choose love. That you saw fit to love each one of us, even when we didn't deserve it. That while we were doing things, God, that you still didn't like, you saw fit to use love as the way to bridge the gap between our differences. And so, God, may we be encouraged to do the same thing. May we choose love. To love the people who maybe we struggle with, who maybe we don't agree with, who maybe we see the world through a completely different lens. But even though we don't agree, help us to choose love. Help us to be about serving and washing our neighbor's feet. Because that's what has the power to change hearts, and that's what has the power to change the world. So God, encourage us today. Encourage us to love our neighbors, to love our community, and continue to be for them. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.